So at a certain point, you have to start realizing what are your gaps, what are your weaknesses, what are you good at, and what is going to drive the business forward for you, right? Being the face of the business, being out there, networking, doing the sales, or like doing the delivery side of it. But what are the back of house things that you could take off your plate? That's the easiest place to start, right? Like bringing in somebody at a coordinator level, whether it's you are a product brand, that might be doing your social media and just building that presence. That might be getting somebody to do your finance or review your contracts. So it's really, what are those weaknesses that you have? What are the things that you are not as good at or you don't want to do on a day-to-day? Because those are the things that are going to take away from your business. And how can you bring in the experts in that? Because bringing in an expert for 2 or 3 hours a week even to handle your invoicing is going to free you up to go drive business, and you're going to make so much more money and grow your business more that way. So those are the things that we recommend. Like that's where you start, right? In noticing the gaps and then filling in around those.
So just to get us started, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about your company and kind of how it got started.
Yeah. So I was a creative. I fell into recruiting by accident. I think most people don't like go in, like checking out that I'm going to be a recruiter when I grow up. But I fell into recruiting about 20 plus years ago at this point. And yeah, I know it goes really fast. We'll stick with 15 plus. So I, early on in my career, fell into recruiting and spent some time, at the big recruiting firms, right? Like being that like second employee in the New York office and, helping grow it to 40 people and, helping grow nationally. And then went to another recruiting firm and, worked with them leading their New York flagship and then kind of, got laid off during COVID and realized I had spent a lot of time building for other people, and just realized that there was a gap in the market where a lot of firms were, built for big corporations, right? The Nikes and the Vayners and the NBCs can afford big recruitment fees. But if you're a small recruiting firm, you can't necessarily afford to bring in outside help to help you hire, but you need it more because you don't get the same reach that, Vayner does or Nike does when they post,
Mm,
where they're getting
mhm.
it within an hour.
Right.
So built Noble to really service more of those independent agencies and brands that are looking to grow and scale. So instead of charging 100% markup on freelance, we charge 25%. Instead of charging 30% for full-time fees, we charge 15%. So it makes it much more attainable for those small growing brands. And then one of the things we do is instead of just layering in headcount from a recruiting standpoint, we help from an advisory standpoint to make sure that you have the right infrastructure from a people processes and ops standpoint so that you're not just building a skyscraper and hoping it's going to stand, but you have the right solution to grow. Because that's something we see a lot, right? It's like just add people and it's going to work, and it doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily. So we help companies make sure that they're setting up properly and helping them build the internal resources to do that.
Interesting. I think this concept is one of the most interesting concepts in business in terms of building a team and recruiting and all of that. Because for a lot of entrepreneurs, I feel like there's a lot you can do by yourself, right? But there is a time when your bandwidth isn't big enough to do all the stuff you have to do. And I feel like there's a lot, like I'm struggling with this idea right now. It's like, how do you affordably build a team with people you trust and in a way that, works inside of your business? So I was hoping you could kind of go into a little bit about what you've seen in your experience around, solo entrepreneurs, small companies building teams with, 1, 2, 3 person teams and what they should look for and, all of that stuff.
Yeah. The biggest mistake that we see, I'll start with that, is that and I've done it, right? Where like when you are a solo entrepreneur, you feel like you're like, I've just got to do everything, right? And like, I've got to do the business development and I've got to do the marketing and I've got to be in the weeds and I've got to do the ops and the finance and all of those things. But at a certain point, when you're starting out, like you have to, right? And, you get to this kind of tipping point where all of a sudden you realize that your time is being taken up by the administrative things or the things that you're not as good at. And the things that you're not as good at are going to take you twice as long to get done. Right. Cause like there's
100%.
that element of like procrastination or like it's not your day to day skills. So it's just going to take you longer to get there. So at a certain point, you have to start realizing what are your gaps, what are your weaknesses. Like, what are you good at and what is going to drive the business forward for you, right? Like being the face of the business, being out there, networking, doing the sales or like doing the delivery side of it. But what are the back of house things that you could take off your plate? That's the easiest place to start, right? Like bringing in somebody at a coordinator level, whether it's If you are a product brand, that might be doing your social media, and just building that presence. That might be getting somebody to do your finance or review your contracts. So it's really that what are those weaknesses that you have? What are the things that you are not as good at or you don't want to do on a day to day? Because those are the things that are going to take away from your business. And how can you bring in the experts in that? Because bringing in an expert for, let's say, 2 or 3 hours a week, even to handle your invoicing is going to free you up to go drive business. And you're going to make so much more money and grow your business more that way. So, those are the things that we recommend is like that's where you start, right? And noticing the gaps and then filling in around those. One of the biggest, I think, impactful hires that people make tend to be that marketing driver, right? Because nobody knows your business is there until you've told them multiple times
Mm,
on multiple channels. So
right.
bringing in that head of marketing, marketing manager, email marketing, whoever that person is, or even depending on where you're looking to go, like that CMO level person on a fractional basis can really help you start to build out things.
What do you
And
mean by fractional basis? I'm just curious.
yeah, so on more of like a freelance part-time basis. And that's
Gotcha.
something that we're seeing post-COVID. A lot of executive level people are shifting into more of a fractional or like advisory consulting type of
Mhm,
work,
mhm.
especially as companies are going back into office full time because they don't want to go into the office, right? Like they have kids to pick up from soccer, they, have like, dentist appointments to go to, all the things,
Right.
and they want the flexibility. So they're leaving companies that are forcing them to go back into work full time and they're going into consulting. So there's this amazing talent on the market that you can have access to for 5 hours, 25 hours, and you can kind of scale that as your business grows and as your needs grow. And I think there's two ways to kind of approach it is like, one is like, am I just filling in the gaps, right? And like, am I just bringing in somebody that can send out emails for me once a week, like email newsletters and do some posting? Or are you bringing in that higher level person that can help you really like with your brand strategy, your go to market, and then can help you identify like, how do you build out this team going forward? And I think it just depends on your goals, right? Like if you want to go big, you need that heavy hitter, even if it's a
Right.
few hours a week to kind of help you build the structure. And then you could fill in the gaps as you go. But that tends to be the thing that we see that moves the needle the most for people.
That makes sense, and talking about kind of the freelancer idea, I've heard more and more people talk about how, as a small business solo entrepreneur, there is a lot of opportunity out there to bring in freelancers and stuff like that. So, you think that's one of the best ways that somebody with a solo entrepreneur business could bring in people and have help?
Yep, 100%. Because often too, you're paying them on 1099. So you're not taking on the headcount. You're not taking on, the payroll expenses and all of those things. And you can scale up and down because sometimes especially when you're in the early stages, business is a little bit of a roller coaster,
Yeah.
right? When you have your ups and downs, and sometimes you need somebody, right? And you need a whole team and you need somebody who's like fully dedicated, but sometimes also like when things slow down, you only need a few hours a week. So having that scalability, I think, is really helpful so that you're not on the hook for somebody's salary every month. And also, every hire counts. And you could say that's true in any company, but within a small company and when you're just starting out, it counts so much more, right? Because make or break your company having the right
Yeah.
people in there. So it gives you a chance to see what somebody brings to the table and actually see them in action versus, just what you're seeing on paper or what you're getting in an interview.
Yeah.
So it's a really good way to scale without the risk. And people do that across the board, right? Whether it's your accounting, your ops, your creative, your marketing, all of
Mhm.
those things. And there's some really great talent out there that's looking for those types of opportunities too.
Interesting. So I have a few different questions along that line. Where do you think is the best place to look for these people that you could potentially bring in on a part-time basis?
Yeah. I mean, part of it is your network, right? And part of it is like the job postings on LinkedIn. I'll tell you though, from our experience of it, we post, right? As a recruiting firm, we post blogs on our clients' behalf, but there's a lot of work that goes into getting to that talent. We posted a sales job, for example, and we had over 1,000 applicants. When we actually drilled down to like the criteria that we needed of somebody that came from ad agency space, was in a certain market, and had the relevant sales experience, we ended up with 8 people. So, there's a lot of noise that you have to go through. So, I do recommend working with recruiting partners just because 'cause they'll really understand how to vet a network, because your time is valuable as a founder, right? And if you're posting a job and you have to go through all of those applicants, do all of the screens, it's gonna take your time away again from the things that you can do best. So, I would say, like, reaching out to your network and then working with recruiters that you trust and partners that you trust to bring you that talent.
What do you think about some of the third-party platforms like a Fiverr and all of these places to find freelance people to work with you?
It can work, right? But again, like you're lacking the human element. So the good thing is that if you're working with a recruiting firm, there's a human element, right? And like it's the same thing as when you do a search on LinkedIn. We'll often start with like doing our search on LinkedIn of like, here's the criteria I want, and we get 1,000 candidates. And a lot of their portfolios look great or their resumes look great. But then what happens with the actual skills when they get in the door? So a lot of times when you're working with a firm, you're getting somebody who is been placed by them before on other assignments and can hit the ground running, as opposed to somebody who has really pretty work online, but they might not be able to speak to clients, or they might be really bad at delivering on deadlines, or their work might be really sloppy, and then you get this, especially I would say the biggest risks with bringing on talent we see on the tech side of things. So like building out a website, building out an app, all of those things, you don't realize anything goes wrong until it's time for the site to launch. It doesn't work,
Right.
and then you're out of all this money. It's like we had it happen the other day where a client got referred to us because she got connected with a designer on her own to build a site. And, she had a budget, she was working with them. And then all of a sudden, paid the invoice, saw the first work, and it was like a color palette, and that was it. And she's like, I'm now out of $5,000 and I got to color the logo or anything else. And then called us and was like, hey, do you have a designer? We need to actually like build something from here. So sometimes, when you're trying to save costs, it actually ends up costing you more time and money in the long run because you're kind of just taking a chance on somebody, without
Right.
having that like that background insight. You're only getting so much information up front.
That makes sense, that makes sense, and a different question I had was, what do you think is a good budget for a solo entrepreneur trying to build, maybe just 1 person or 2 people? Is there a certain budget that, you look for in somebody that's doing that or not really?
I think there's no one size fits all, right? Because there's such a range of talent. Like we're even working with like a lot of like international talent now where, we're working with people that are in Latin America, especially on the admin and assistant side of things, where, you're bringing in people that are like, for $15 an hour, that translates to much more money there. You're able to bring people on, that can be a huge support for you at a lower cost, but it also depends like what you need, right? Like what are your goals and where you're trying to go and where are you right now? So I think there's no way to say like the one size fits all.
Yeah.
And it depends on like where is your company? What do you need? Every scope is different and every scope is unique. And, are you bringing on more admin support? Is it more marketing support? And I think you could get creative with any budget, right? It just depends what you're trying to accomplish. I think if you have $1,000 a month and you're trying to get, somebody who used to be a CMO of Nike, it's not going to align. If you're realistic, and you're in what you're looking for in terms of talent. And then it's just a matter of scaling, right? Like, let's say you have $10,000 a month. Maybe you can't have that person 40 hours a week, but if that person's really good and knows their space, can they get you a little further up the runway with 4 hours a week or something like that? Or do you bring in, what we often look at with clients is you have a set budget. This is what you're trying to accomplish. Let's say it's marketing. Bring in that heavy hitter to help you create the vision, but then let's execute with more junior level talent, right? You don't need that
Right.
senior person on all the time. So, I think the good thing about if you have a partner who's really vested in your success and who understands and who listens is they're going to be that partner to help you figure out the puzzle, right? And not to say like, here's a person, great, run with them, but like that might not be who you need 3 months from now. That might just be the person who you need to like get the plane off the ground. But then let's get
Makes
you somebody
sense.
else to fly it.
That makes sense, that makes sense, and I wanted to ask you too, what do you think about I've heard a lot about over the last few years about how bringing the more entry level people in, the younger people that are willing to learn and stuff like that. What are your thoughts on that idea overall when it comes to recruiting and all of that?
Yeah. I think it's great. I think, for example, like we have a coordinator, she's actually out of Argentina. She is amazing and she is so eager and excited to learn and wants to take on things and is just like passionate about learning and growing. And I think if you have that type of person that has that, like it's not even on paper, it's a personality thing, right? That can't be
Right,
taught. And some people just have that drive. So I think, especially when we're looking at like the digital space, looking at social, looking at influencer,
right.
there are, you know, people that are coming out of school that are 21 years old that have way more insight and understand the trends and what's, on point and what's moving versus people that have had 10 years in that space. So,
Mm.
it's just it's bringing different lenses and perspectives to things. I think on the flip side, if you're bringing in somebody who's like brand new out of school and you're asking them to run operations and process, not going to have that insight and institutional knowledge, right? So I think
Right.
it depends on the role that you're looking for. I
Yeah.
will say, one of the things that we're seeing is that with kind of this like return to work, a lot of the newer people in the job market want to be in person because they want to get that face time. They want to be able to sit next to somebody and absorb and like hear what they're doing and be able to learn and get the mentorship where you see a little bit of that glitch because the more senior people don't want to be in the office. So that's where you're seeing like a little bit of that skip. I would say if there's connection points where like you're able to, even just for a couple days, get people together in a room, I think you'll see a lot more growth in your junior talent and that connection where now they have that in-person time with, your more senior, more tenured people on the team that are willing to help them because they've had that face time.
That makes sense, that makes sense. The way you said you bring them in maybe a couple times a month, right? I really like that idea. How do you think you would accomplish something like that if for a more online business if you have people, let's say, in different parts of the country or even different parts of the world, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think so many of our clients right now, we have moved even from like a national staffing model to like a global talent network model because so many people are looking for talent, whether it's for affordability's sake or whether it's having like an always on, especially on like the
Yeah.
content and creative generation, right? Like you have people on opposite ends of the world that you're just handing content over to and are constantly working. But I think the biggest thing that we see successful, and this is whether your team's in person or whether everybody's remote, but it's setting the expectations and making sure everybody understands the expectations. And you can't just hire great people. And this is whether you're a brand new startup or you're a well established
Right.
hundreds to thousands of people company, is that you can't bring people on and not give them the tools and the platform to succeed and expect them to be successful. You have to be able to give that support. And I think when you're first starting out, if you're bringing on talent and you have people in different time zones and different expectations, like, does everyone know what everyone's responsible for? Like if you need something, do you know who to go to for that? Do you know you have the ability to go to that person to help you? And just making sure that everybody has that opportunity to connect, whether it's like on individual one-on-ones, like everybody has, if it's a task deliverable, like what are the timelines laid out? What are you using from a software standpoint to make sure that there's process checks in place? Because that's one of the biggest things too. I think as people grow, you focus on the people, you forget about the process.
Right.
And then teams, as you eventually end up growing, and we see this a lot with bigger companies, especially where they're remote, is everybody's in silos. So nobody knows what anyone else is doing or that they can go to them to help on this project or that you actually have this capability in house. And then people end up rehiring for capabilities or bringing in
Yeah.
outside resources when you already have it. So I think that's one of the biggest things is like just the communication and making sure that there's that cohesion between the team and everyone understands people's responsibilities, roles, and the tasks and what they're responsible for along the way and where to flag it when things go wrong.
Right, interesting. So, how much time do you think that would take for them to make those processes? Is that just something that you think happens over time while working with that new hire, or do you think they should set the processes that they're expected to do before they even hire somebody on?
I think if you can set processes and somebody walks into it, it's smooth, right? But knowing that you're going to have to evolve things as your company evolves, because what works when you're 3 people isn't going to work when you're 20 people.
Yeah,
Or if you are not a processes person, right? Because some people just kind of fall into like,
yeah.
I'm running a company now. Great. Now what do I do? Like that's where that like bringing in somebody who could help you with processes and ops, even if it's like, hey, let's sit down and talk about like what are we doing? Like, right. And we see a lot of times, even the RFP process, right? Where companies are doing RFPs, they're pitching work and they don't have a dedicated person who's running point on the RFP, or they don't have a template that they're using for the RFP. And so you're constantly regenerating the wheel and doing more work than you need to versus like you have this database of like, here's the answers based on like the general questions that we're getting, or here's the information that we need, or this person's responsible for like the copy, this person's responsible for the deck, and having that smooth like process already laid out. The more you can do that, the better. But if you're not that processes person, bringing in somebody, even on like an occasional, like quarterly basis, just to say, like, sit down and like, what are we doing? What are the platforms we're using? Like, how are we tracking things? There's so many tools now. So, like, what are you using? And help having them kind of fine tune as you grow and scale.
Interesting. So, do you think it's possible to, because you talked about the bringing somebody in quarterly, that's super interesting. I feel like when I think about a hire, I think about, a part-time employee that might be working, let's say 12 hours a week, but you're saying that you don't even need that. You could use somebody that just is literally there for a couple hours a quarter and then just use them there, you know what I mean? That's super interesting. Have you implemented that into any businesses recently that you've seen it work out like that?
We do a lot of like advisory project type of work where
Mm,
people are coming in just for specific things, whether it's, we just onboarded this new person and there's nobody here to kind of guide them and mentor them and make sure that they're set up properly, or whether it's like, let's just do an audit of the processes and where can we optimize things and help refine things. And sometimes it's just having that outside lens because when you're
yeah.
really close to the business, I know that I do it, but it's like you're in the business and you don't see the little things where you're like, wait, I could do this easier, or I could do this better, or like, you know what? I can automate this. Like, this is an easy
Yeah.
AI plugin. You don't see those things where somebody else can come in with that lens. Even I was chatting with somebody the other day, and having seen her agency evolve, they're doing work now that they're getting paid for, like strategy work and things like that. Well, that was things that when they first started out, they didn't realize they could get paid for that and monetize it because they were focused on just producing content. So they're like, you're producing the content, we're giving the strategy away for free. So now strategy division, but sometimes it's just having those outside conversations that can kind of help you out, figure out like, okay, what are you charging for? What are you not? And what should you be charging for? What other things can you kind of upsell to bring in more revenue?
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So when you look for somebody that could do something like that, because I think that's a super interesting topic that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about. Are you looking for the same things that you're looking for when you're just bringing on maybe a regular freelancer, or is there a different criteria you might be looking for when you're trying to bring somebody like that on?
I think it depends, right? Like it all goes back to like the goals. There's no one
Yeah.
size fits all.
Yeah.
And a lot of what we do too is like kind of the reverse recruiting where like we're meeting with talent that has these great skills where they're like growth people or they're comms, they're focused on like comms and awards, or they're focused on like auditing the business and finding those gaps and finding areas for revenue. And then going back to the founders that we work with, just based on kind of knowing our founders and where they are and saying like, hey, this is a person you should be talking to. This is a person you should have on your radar. So, it just kind of depends on where the business is and what the needs
Yeah.
are based on that.
Makes sense, makes sense. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your journey building the company that you started and kind of how it was for you. I mean, you said you've been in it for what, 20 years?
So I've been on the recruiting side for like 15, 20 years now. For the last 3 years, I've launched Noble Talent, which is my,
Nice, nice, nice. So how was that going from, working for a different company and then starting your own company?
I wish I would have done it sooner. I think, for me, just having the autonomy to be able to build something that I believe in. Um,
Yeah.
I think a lot of the big recruitment firms that I've worked at, it's built on margins and markups, right? Like they're a bank at the end of the day. Like their goal many people and payroll as many people, and charge as high margins as they can. But I used to hate when clients were like, well, what's the talent getting paid? And, like having to tell them that they're paying $100 an hour and the talent's only getting 50, right? Because it's just such a huge gap, and at the end of the day, you're asking people to take less money, and it's not something that I believed in, right? I believed in the connections, and I believed in bringing great people together, but I didn't believe in charging the high rates that we were. So I built Newable really to make it more affordable and transparent, to be able to bring people together, and we tell the clients know exactly what the talent's being paid, they pay them directly, we charge our fees separately, or if we're payrolling people, we just pass the cost through. Yeah, so it's something that I feel like actually helps people at the end of the day, and that I feel good about. So I wish I would have done it sooner. And I think I learned so much along the way that had really set me up to be able to take out the things that like what worked, what didn't work, and build a model that's kind of based on those things.
That's interesting. That's interesting. So, have you noticed like a different style of like is your business a different style? Obviously, it's different from the bigger recruiting firms, but are you using is it like I don't know how to ask the question. Is it like for me, for example, right? I started a marketing agency and I do a lot with content and stuff. And a lot of bigger marketing agencies are the same way where they charge a ton of money to do not that much or similar things. Have you noticed with you kind of coming in the market and doing different things, have you noticed people like that more and you get more business like that, or how does that go?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting because like, we don't get a lot of pushback on our contract because it's very client friendly, right? Like,
Yeah.
when we like, even any fees that you pay us in freelance or fractional, like, we just take off the bill if you convert the person to full-time. So, like, really made with the clients and the talent in mind. I think the biggest challenge is getting people to know that you're out there, right? Because you have a reputation, but within your circle, right? And everybody else doesn't really know that you're there. And it's the same whether you're a recruiting firm or a marketing agency
Yeah.
or, a new vitamin brand,
Yeah.
it's getting the word out. We get really great response when people actually hear what we're doing. It's just actually getting in front of people to be like, okay, this is what we're doing, right? This is how we're different, because even from like an executive search standpoint, like we don't charge upfront retainers. So like, it's just so much more affordable
Yeah.
and people first as
Yeah.
opposed to just being worried about the margins and the markups. Like, that's, like, kind of the side thing for us. We wanna connect the people and make things happen.
Interesting. So you're more of like you're trying to help the world in a sense as opposed to just making money on the back end, right?
Exactly, exactly. Because I think, when you're building a business, if all you're focused on is the bottom line, like, your priorities are in the wrong place, right?
Yeah.
Like, yes, businesses are for profit and, yes, like, that is, at the end of the day, the goal, but, what is your mission? What is your value, and are you driven by that? And I us, it's like bringing people together and like making those connections and representing creatives or, whether it's creatives or, marketing or, advisory and ops people that we believe in and that we think are really amazing that we want to get out there and talk to our clients about. And same with our clients, like representing companies that we're excited to get out there and, talk to people about and like, hey, you really want to work here. They're doing cool stuff or, like they have this amazing culture. That's kind of what drives us at the end of the day.
Interesting. So I'm curious to hear more about kind of that the journey that you took in the first couple years because I think it's super interesting and I think that gets lost in a lot of business nowadays is that you really are just worried about the bottom line. For example, when I started my business, I was just worried about the bottom line, making money, you know what I'm saying? And comparing to other agencies that were charging this, so I'm like, "Oh, I should charge this," you know what I mean? But at the end of the day, it's like the less you charge, in theory, the more people are gonna wanna work with you, you know what I'm saying? So I'm curious how those first like, the first year went when you were trying to start this business. Was it like were you getting a lot of clients in, or were you was it a struggle? Like, how was it?
Yeah, I think like anything, it's very like cyclical, right? Like there's a
Yeah,
couple things that come in and you're like, yes, I could do this. And then, there's those days where you're like, hey, is it fair? Like, sending yourself the test email of like, did this
for
actually go
sure.
anywhere? Um,
Yeah.
so I think probably my biggest issue or like my biggest hurdle the first year was that I mean, I knew to be patient, but I think I relied too much on my network where it's like I
Mm,
went out and like, reached out to people that I knew on LinkedIn and I was like, okay, great. Like, let's work together. Let's catch up. And, you get that response of like, yeah, let's catch up, let's grab coffee or like, let's jump on a Zoom. But then they don't necessarily have anything for you right now. Right. So like, it's great to catch up but from a business standpoint, it's not driving the business forward.
yeah.
So I took the pivot of like, going out, getting like we got lists that were like really targeted of like agencies in New York, agencies in LA from, 50 to 200 people to start reaching out to and really driving new messaging out. And I think that's when we started to see more of the traction. And I think too, like so many of the things are like it's in person, right? It's like going to events, showing up, doing like we actually started doing a lot of roundtables because it's about like bringing people together and adding value and allowing people to be in the same room. And we keep them small. We keep them like 6 people. They're virtual, and we kind of do like personal invite outreach because it allows people to be in a room where they're talking to people, right? Like you have a marketing agency and you're just getting started, like bringing together other founders
Yeah.
in that same phase where you could talk about like what's going on, right? Or like how do you scale? What are the challenges you're having? We did one around like how to attract and retain talent as you're growing. Mm. So, just different topics where you're adding value instead of just trying to sell to somebody.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Is that maybe a suggestion you would have to early stage entrepreneurs trying to build business is just getting not doing so much transactional stuff, but actually just getting in the rooms with people and setting stuff up to bring value?
Totally. Because I think then too, when you're doing outreach or you're like, "Hey, I see you're connected to this person. Do you mind introducing me?" There's a face and a personality that goes to it, as opposed to just like it's a lot easier to hit delete on an email from somebody you've never spoken to, and we all get so much noise that just like whether it's, all the emails that I'm sure you get too that are in your inbox on a daily basis, or whether it's, we're posting a job and 1,000 people are applying but half of them don't actually have the skills of, what
Yeah.
we're looking for. Like, you know, I'll post like a sales role, I'm getting a dance party coordinator, and I'm like, we're not there. So, it's having to like filter through all of that where when you have that connection, people are so much more willing to help out or like reply to your email. And I think it just makes it more fun too, right? Because you know the people that
Yeah.
you're reaching to and that you're trying to help.
Right, right, right. It definitely makes it more interesting, right? Like you get to do different stuff inside of your business. It's not just the same thing over and over again, you know?
Exactly.
Interesting. Well, along those lines, what are some things since you've been in your business for a while now? You would say you're still early though, no? Like 3 years in business is still kind of early,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, we're early. I would say the biggest shift is like now, like I have a team, so there's like, 4
Yeah.
people versus like the first 2 years it was me and like sometimes one other person.
Let me ask you a question around that. How did you yourself build your team of however many people you have now? How long did it take you and like what did you look for in those people to build your team?
Yeah, so I would say probably the first year and a half, it was just me for the most part,
Mhm.
with like some help kind of tagged in here and there. We've kind of, my first, for me, like having a recruiting firm, my first thing was like, okay, I have to drive the business and be the face of the business. And then it got to a point where I wasn't able to deliver as quickly as I wanted, right? And for us,
Yeah.
the degree is like placing the talent. So bringing
Yeah.
a recruiter on more of a fractional, like consultant basis, and then brought in a couple of recruiters as that scaled, and then bringing in, sales, but on that like more like fractional basis. So, I think you don't want to commit to the headcount and the payroll until you're in a
Yeah.
place you can sustain that.
Yeah.
And then we've brought in like ops coordinator who's a huge help because then as the team gets busier, like the thing we don't have
Yeah.
time to do is like scheduling interviews and,
Yeah.
social and all of those things.
Mhm.
But I think we've kind of grown as the business has needed it and kind of
Yeah.
seen where like the demand is and not overstretching. So, that's been one of the biggest things. And hiring people, again, like fractionally, especially when you have people that are in the business where it's, delivery, it's client facing, like you want to make sure you have the right people in place too. Because every person is really going to make such a huge difference for your company.
Makes sense, makes sense. So for you as the founder, how did your job change over those 3 years where you were kinda shifting people in, finding different people how to work and all of that stuff? Did it change or did it stay similar?
I think it stayed similar. I think for me, like having a team now, I'm able to kind of shift into the role that depending on what we need, right? And sometimes it's like focusing on like sales and outbound activity.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's like, hey, we just got this influx of jobs and like needing to be more on the, the delivery side of things. Or it, like what are the awards that we should be getting in front of? What are the, panels or committees that we should be on and things like that. So I would say my role kind of shifts, but having which is all things that I was doing before, I'm just able to stay away from some of the things. Like, I could take a couple days out of sales because I have somebody who's doing sales, right? And, like, knowing that the ball's not gonna get dropped, where before, when you're a solo entrepreneur, everything's on you, right? And if you're
Yeah.
taking a day off or you're taking, like, "Hey, this afternoon, I'm gonna work on doing invoices," well, nothing else is gonna happen because 'cause you're working
Yeah.
invoices.
Exactly.
So it's just figuring out what's going to make the most impact for the business. And I think for me too, the other thing is when I first, and we're still in that space that we're small enough that this is like my approach, but I want to hire people that bring experience that come from the industry, that come from either, recruiting or advertising marketing so that they understand the clients so they understand the delivery and there's both credibility to our clients because then we're bringing in people that have years of experience either in advertising or which are like the majority of the roles we're placing or within recruiting, but also it's less of a lift on my end as the founder, as the person who's like mentoring, coaching, training people. When you're bringing in people that have no experience in the field that you're bringing them into and just hoping they're going to flourish, it's going to take a lot of time as a founder away from you to get these people up the runway. So the more relevant experience they can bring to the table, even if the price point is a little bit higher as a founder, I would always say like at least your initial people, like bring in people that know what they're doing already.
That's super interesting. I could go on with this conversation for a long time, to be honest. I have a bunch of questions. It's super interesting because, like I said, I think building teams is one of the hardest things a entrepreneur can do, you know what I mean? And just knowing, there's so many variables that go into it and everything. So it's just super interesting to hear it coming from somebody that's in the market one, in the recruiting, and somebody that's kind of built their team around themselves as well. But yeah, I was just wondering kind of to leave us off if you had any kind of last thoughts for like solo entrepreneurs out there that they could do or something like that that you would want to leave them with.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is have a network. And, I think even for me, I have friends that are also in recruiting firms or that I've worked with over the years, or, just that I trust, even if they're in totally different fields, that you can go to and ask for advice, and having that person to bounce ideas off of. People are more willing to help you than you realize if you just ask for it. So I think having that network of people that you trust, and then, same with like growing the business, like just get out there and network and talk to people, tell many people about what you're doing, and they're going to want to help you get the word out. So I think, at the core of it, especially as a small business or like a sole founder, that network is huge. And it just gives you that sanity check. Sometimes you're sitting in your office by yourself all day, that there's other people out there that you could talk to. So I'd say, that's the biggest thing.
And that's good insights for sure. And I've heard that from a few different people, and I need to start doing that more because I am one of those people that just sits in my office for hours on end. And but yeah, I appreciate you for coming on, Susan. This was a great podcast.